Hey, I'm Morgan, and this is the PS We Expire podcast. Today, I want to share with you one of my all-time favorite metaphors having to do with relationships. This is about our relationship with other people and actually how our relationship with ourselves informs our relationship with other people. So if you will, just imagine for a moment that your inner life is like a house. I want to talk about it first in the context of our relationship with other people. So if you think about your inner life being a house, there are some people who you will never let pass the front door. These are the people who you just feel like are maybe trying to sell you something, or that they want to speak into your life, but they have no real interest in getting to know you. They're just, peddling some type of message or some type of product, and you just know that you will never let them be on the front porch, ever, ever, ever. The majority of people in our lives will be on the sidewalk, especially with social media and with our lives being on full display on the internet. The majority of people only will ever comment on the exterior of the house. This is true for other people with you, and this is true for you with other people. We rarely know what is going on behind closed doors. So I guess I should take a step back and say the majority of people are on the sidewalk, and then there are people who decide to come to the front door, and depending on how they behave on the front porch determines whether or not you'll let them in. But the people who you're like, no way in hell are they ever coming into my house, are the people typically who have something to sell you and don't really seem to have really any vested interest in your well-being at all. They're very selfish, self-centered, or arrogant people that deserve to stay on the outside. And that's okay. The next phase of your inner world and your inner reality is, I don't think a lot of people have these anymore, but I remember this room when I was growing up. My best friend's family had like the living room that was the first room that guests would enter in the house, and it was always very clean and tidy. And if we played there, we were very aware that we had to clean up after ourselves. We were very nervous about scuffing any of the furniture, or like when we would move the furniture back, we would make sure like the coffee table legs were in their divots on the rug. So everything had its place. Everything was always very nicely kept. And if you're thinking of the metaphor of this being the first room of your inner world, this is the part of you that is kind of always put together. This is the part of you that is still a representation of who you are on a deep level, because the things that are in that space, they've either been chosen by you or they've been chosen for you through your upbringing. So everything is kind of like where it's supposed to be. Maybe sometimes you open the curtains to let some more light in there, but basically, like, there are some people who you cannot ever bring to the inner workings of the house. They always have to stay in that formal living room. Sometimes this is people that we know on a surface level, whether it's a work acquaintance, or another mom or dad who's in the PTA with you or whatever, where you're friendly, but it still is just a very formal thing. Some of us have family members that really only stay in the formal living room, that is the only place where it has been safe for them to be, or you have just found that there isn't a lot of interest in going further into knowing who you are. And so people stay in that formal living room. The next place in your inner world, in your house, is the kitchen. The kitchen is where things are messy. The kitchen is where you are cooking, and where maybe some music is blasting and you're more relaxed, and you have someone who's sitting at the counter on a bar stool, and you're talking about things that are more in depth. There's a more relaxed and casual and calm environment there. These are the people that I still think are actually kind of few and far between, but certainly more involved and invested in your life than they want to know what's happening beyond the formal living room. And these people can be in the mess with you. They don't mind getting their hands dirty as they help you prepare food. They like to celebrate you at the kitchen counter. There's a lot of love and generosity and time spent in this room. The last room is the basement. The basement is a scary place. Okay. A lot of people don't even ever look at the basement door. They refuse to acknowledge that there are deeper levels to themselves. They refuse to even look at the fact that there's a lot happening below the surface. Maybe it's partly because it's always been off limits. Maybe it's because there are potentially some very, very scary things down there. Maybe it is dark and has a funny smell. Maybe it's cold. Maybe it's just a very frightening thing. So either people consciously or unconsciously don't look at that door to the basement. They just like to spend all their time in those upper rooms. Now, I would say that if you are interested in having deep, meaningful relationships, if you are also interested in what goes beyond kind of the pop psychology, personal development, or personal growth, it is imperative that you go open that door. And I guess I should speak about what that experience has been like for me. I don't know that I consciously chose to open the door. I think through my experiences, I mean, I can think of like three major things that made me say, okay, like there are some things happening in my house, in my inner world that I don't understand and that I need to investigate more, because I don't think that I can continue to live in this formal living room or in the kitchen pretending that there aren't things that are calling to me from the basement. One of those certainly was my daughter's diagnosis, because it blew the lid off of my perception of what a good life meant. It blew the lid off my perception of success, of contribution, of productivity. It really helped me ask a lot of big questions about what does a quality of life look like on an individual level, and also being responsible for the quality of life for this little person that is in my care. And the major thing that opened that door for me was recognizing how many things were outside of my control, that my work was to learn how to live in a state of acceptance, not in a state of indifference or resignation, but true acceptance for the hard things and the good things and the temporariness of it all. The very kind of tenuous line that we all walk on all the time, where things could change in an instant, that our lives could be uprooted and completely different with one phone call, with one step off of the sidewalk, with one conversation, with one thing that we read that just opens our minds in a new way. So that was certainly one of the things that made me be like, okay, I really need to not pay attention to the lock on that door. Like I got to figure out what's down there. The second thing that made me look at that door was, I mean, I suppose related to the first thing, but everything with Annie really uprooted my perception of God. Being raised in a very religious household that had like a very structured view who God is didn't leave a lot of room for curiosity or questioning. And when I think, and this happens with a lot of people, when you're confronted with suffering, whether it's your own or someone close to you that you love, or collective suffering, there's a lot of questions about what's beyond what we can see. We have a lot of questions about meaning. We have a lot of questions about what is the purpose of all of this? What is the nature of God, or what is the nature of the metaphysical? What's happening behind the scenes here that I'm not privy to? Suffering has a way of making us ask these questions. And very closely tied to the first and second thing was the third thing that made me realize that I needed to dig down into my basement, was a disruption in many of my close relationships. The the second thing that I said about having a uprooted and shifted perspective on God and religion and the great mystery of it all became really a source of confusion and misunderstanding and fracturing in some of my relationships. So I had a lot of work to do, a lot of work that I wanted to do to understand myself and to understand how I was contributing to my relationships being the way that they were. And finding the areas where I had some agency and something that I could do, that there was a responsibility piece there, and then also understanding what things I couldn't do. I really started to dig into some of the research and the theories around the subconscious mind. What's happening beneath the surface of what we're actually aware of. So those are the three things that contributed to me wanting to move out of the formal living room, out of the kitchen, and really go down into the basement. I would recommend for anyone who either is kind of like starting on this journey or maybe is in the throes of it, that you have somebody who knows that you're doing this, because sometimes we will discover things in the basement that we really need support to know how to hold. So having a good therapist, a good spiritual counselor of some type who is aware that you are digging down into some of these deeper levels of your psyche and of your personality and of your the mental frameworks that you have is really, really important, especially if there is a lot of trauma in your history. So the basement. Okay, the way that my mind presented the basement to me, and it will be different for other people, but this, the metaphor for all of the things that we don't look at on a regular basis, either because of fear or we just haven't thought about it. But in my mind, the way that the basement was these like wooden steps with a wooden railing, and the basement was dark. And I was kind of groping along down there, and there were all these boxes stacked everywhere, and it just had this kind of dampness to it, like things hadn't been opened in a long time and investigated, like maybe ever. And there were windows, but they were really dirtied up, and so there really wasn't a lot of light down there, maybe like a sole light bulb, but just enough. It felt like such a foreign and unfamiliar territory for me to be starting to like open some boxes and see what has been buried down there for so long. The transformation One of the important pieces of the transformation from what my basement used to look like to what it looks like and feels like now, I would say the key component to the change here is the shift from shame, that I would be ashamed of anything that was in the boxes, or that I would feel shame for even opening the boxes, or that I would feel shame for having those boxes in the basement in the first place. The shift from shame to self-love, to self-compassion, to not needing to be afraid of anything that was in those boxes in that basement, absolutely transformed my relationship to that part of myself. So as I spent more time in my basement, it began to transform into what feels now like a greenhouse. It's like it's green down there and the windows are clear and there's sunlight that's streaming in and there's plants and it somehow I can hear birds down there. I don't know. I don't know what my subconscious is doing with that, but it really is a place now where I enjoy going, and it doesn't feel scary to me to go down there anymore. Now, this is how this all ties back into the metaphor of the house and how it relates to our relationship with other people. I really don't think that anybody can go into that basement with you. There isn't anyone who can hold your hand and go down those steps with you into the basement. However, I do believe that you can take things out of the basement and bring them up to the main floor of the house and show them to the people who are in your kitchen. And there's a reason why it's important for you to be choosy about who goes into your kitchen, because you want the people who are in your kitchen to be as compassionate and loving and curious about the things in your basement as you are. So we have the opportunity with those very few select people who have proven that they're trustworthy, that they're loving, that probably they have also found ways to go into their own basements. Because this is what I found, that the more that I have developed the capacity and the courage and the compassion to go into my own basement, I feel less worried about what other people find in their basements. Like there's not a level of fear there anymore that there used to be, because I've done a lot of the work to just explore my own basement. It's a really beautiful thing. And so I just wanted to share that metaphor with you today, because it really has been something that has just stuck with me for several years now, and I think about it a lot. I think a lot about the transformation from my basement being a dark and scary off limits place, like really almost a sense of terror at what I would find in that basement, to a place now where I enjoy going, that I enjoy spending time, that it's like every new box that I find, it doesn't feel quite as nerve-wracking to open it up and discover what's inside. Like things that I didn't realize that were childhood views that I still hung on to in adulthood, that were, creating unnecessary barriers in my relationships, for example, or ways that I was holding myself back from pursuing the things that I was really interested in, because one of the boxes held a lot of criticism from a young age, a lot of, beliefs about what I was allowed to do, not just as a child, but as a girl. And the more that I can peek into those boxes with a level of wonder and a level of excitement, knowing that there really isn't a downside to that activity if you are someone who has found that self-exploration really contributes to your happiness and your well-being and your joy and your sense of connectedness and purpose. There's not any downside to doing this. So I suppose the two things that I wanted to encourage you with today, one is to, think about that metaphor for yourself. Maybe take inventory of where the different people in your life are allowed to go in your inner world. Kind of do maybe like an inventory on your relationships. And also start to think about going into that basement yourself and finding that the more you go into the basement, the more that it starts to feel like part of your home, that it doesn't feel like an off-limit space or like somehow a separate part of you, but that it is integrated into the whole. I hope that you found this episode interesting. I'm so happy to talk with you about this today. And as usual, I guess before we go, P.S. we expire.